powerful evidence for common descent, for change over time, actually comes from experiments. There's this particularly cool experiment. So I think all of us would agree that cats are pretty different from dogs, right? I mean, you have all the stereotypes. Cats are aloof, cats ignore you, cats scratch you, whereas dogs paw at you, whimper, lick you even though you've been away for 3 months and ignore them totally, right? So these Siberian scientists carried out an experiment. They took Siberian silver foxes, they bred them for tameness. So in each generation, they only allowed the tamest foxes to breed. After just 20 to 30 generations, that's about, I think, 40 to 50 years, this is what they got. Looks very, very much like dogs, right? In fact, they look very, very much like Welsh Border Collies. So, again, experiments are one of the most powerful ways, because you know for sure that they came from the common stock. And after just 20 to 30 generations, well, you wouldn't really recognize them as coming from the common stock. Right, so those are just 3 simple pieces of evidence for evolution. There's a whole wealth of evidence out there. If you're interested, you can go and look it up. I'll go into mechanisms of evolution now. The most famous one is natural selection. It's the main mechanism that leads to adaptive evolution. By that I mean evolution that leads an organism to become more and more suited to its environment. So I'll go through them step by step. If everybody already knows this, just let me know. Is anybody not familiar with this? Right, so then, then I'll just go through this quickly. So each step, you'll see that each step makes sense, and when you add them up together, it leads you to the conclusion that natural processes can lead to adaptation of a species. So I think everybody would agree that there's variation in the population, right? I mean, all we have to do is look around ourselves. And I think all of us would agree that, well, our own characteristics are passed on from parent to child. Right? So I think all of us would also agree, perhaps not in human environment now, but in the wild, among wild animal populations, among wild plant populations, you'll probably agree that some characteristics will allow an individual to reproduce more than others, right? So in this case, it's probably camouflage. You'll probably see that the yellow critters over there are more likely to be spotted than the blue critters over there, right? And that's exactly what happens. The yellow critters are spotted more easily, and they either reproduce less or they get eaten up more quickly. What that means is then that your percentage of those with the favorable traits in the population then rises. Right? And that's how a population, how a species becomes more and more adapted to its environment over time. Right? All you have to do is to have variation. Those that are more suited to the environment either die less or reproduce more, and by that alone, you get an increase in the proportion of those who are more suited to the population. Right? So this is just a quick summary slide, right? One thing to emphasize is that the charge against natural selection is often that natural selection, or rather evolution, is that evolution is random, and randomness cannot then lead to adaptedness, right? But that misunderstands natural selection, because you have random variation. You can't control the variation, but the selection is not random. Selection is actually not that good a word, because it connotes some sort of consciousness, but all that happens is simply that those individuals that are more suited to the environment die less or reproduce less. The environment doesn't care. Right. I've made the other 2 points, so I will go on. Where's the evidence for natural selection? There's a series of experiments that have shown natural selection in the lab. One particularly cool one is this long-term E. coli experiment. You all can go and look it up later if you wish to. But the one I'm going to cover is a particularly cool one by some scientists that actually went into the wild, dammed up a few tributaries, and used them as natural experiments for natural selection. So what happened was that in the wild there were actually 2 tributaries from the start. You've got one tributary here, the predator is this a fish called killifish. It preys on guppies, but this species of predator tends to prey on young guppies. So you expect that, well, young guppies who spend too much time mating, well, get caught by the killifish more easily, right? So what you then expect is that the size of the guppies and the age of the guppies at which they first reproduce would be larger. In the other stream, you have this predator called a cichlid. They prey on adults, and so you would expect the opposite there. That the mean age of reproduction, the mean size of reproduction would be much smaller, and younger. So what the scientists did in the experiment was to transfer some of the guppies from this stream into another tributary without guppies. And they saw exactly what what the theory of evolution would predict. They saw what anybody with knowledge of natural selection would predict. The transferred population reproduced when they were older, when they were larger, as compared to the original population in the stream with cichlids. Right. So that was adaptive evolution. Arguably, a larger part, especially at the molecular level, of evolution is actually non-adaptive evolution. But that doesn't actually account for that much of the adaptedness of life around us, and the discussion is quite a bit more involved. So I'll just go through it very quickly. So first of all, you've got mutations, and by mutations we mean simply changes in DNA sequence. You've got what we call bottlenecking events. Simply, that means a large population being hit by a natural disaster, perhaps a volcanic eruption. So when a volcanic eruption happens, well, nobody cares about whether you've got better camouflage or not, right? A large part of the population closer to the volcano simply cannot outrun the lava flow and dies. That then reduces the genetic diversity of the population. It changes the proportion of characteristics in the population as well. So that can lead to non-adaptive evolution. Lastly, you've got genetic drift, changes in your gene frequencies in the population, or changes in the characteristics of your population through random chance. And how might that happen? So earlier we had the example of, well, human-like creatures on a petri dish or something like that, right? So if you just talk about natural selection, you might expect that the blue creatures survive better, right? But especially when populations are small, random chance events, by random events we mean events not related to the fitness of an organism. Random chance events might just wipe out part of the population, right? And that by itself changes the frequency of the characteristics in the population. So it's more likely to happen when the gene is not that important to the fitness, to the ability of an organism to reproduce, and it's also more likely in small populations. Right. Now that we've covered the evidence for evolution, the mechanisms of evolution, I'll just go into some common misconceptions about evolution and some things that creationists get wrong. So, a couple of things. First of all, we often see this diagram on shirts, right? That it gives you the idea that evolution always leads to progress, that evolution is meant to result in humans. But as we mentioned just now, evolution results in individuals, in organisms becoming more suited to the environment. The environment can change. The environment doesn't care about you, right? So evolution results in more a branching than a linear flow. This is another common one, that individuals can evolve, right? And you see that in those of you who are not familiar with this is from a Japanese cartoon and game called Pokemon. In there, the creatures can evolve, but it's actually more akin to biological development. So people often say that individuals talk about evolution in the sense of individuals evolving, but that doesn't happen. So as we showed just now, evolution is really change over time, right? And it's change in populations over time. So by that definition, well, individuals can't evolve. Individuals just die.